Okay. Okay, I will call this workshop meeting to order. We were just discussing whose meeting this was. We're going to run it as a town council meeting, but it's a joint workshop with whoever's here from the Board of County Commissioners and law enforcement, and a couple items on the agenda. First one is kind of the nature of the law enforcement victims advocate program, and the second one is the Preserve PUD county overlap issue. So we'll start on the LEVA issue. And I don't know if you want to start us off, Preston, or how you want to do this?
Yeah, so I'll kick it off. First, want to say thank you to everybody for accommodating this meeting, and understand the 4:30 hour not the ideal for everybody, so appreciate that. I am going to turn it over to Marshal Schmaltz and Sheriff Perry to provide some background on the Ouray County Victim Services Program, how we've gotten to this point, and provide recommendations on the future of the program. Does that work for you all?
Yep, sure does. See there.
Wherever you'd like. And Tammy, I'm sorry if you're going to do the presentation. I didn't mean to undercut you.
She'll have plenty of them. Guys, thanks a lot. And I just echo what the administrator said. Thanks for the hour and for meeting with us. This is I think a program that has been an evolving program. This is the Victim Services Program that we're talking about tonight. When I was put in as the Chief of Police for the city of Ouray in 2013, we had no Victim Services Program at all throughout the entire county. And I noticed right off the bat, within the very first month, we had a mine accident, and we had the great need for victim services. And I had to call in victim advocates, and the county had to call in victim advocates from out of town. The response time was just terrible. I knew that we needed to have something, and we had to have something quick. So I immediately began with Hilltop working on a program in 2013, but it was not implemented until later in 2014 when we obtained VEL funds, or the Victim Assistance Law Enforcement Grant funds, through the district attorney's office. But at that time, it was just a very basic program, just to meet the basic needs of not only Ouray Police Department, but the other two law enforcement agencies. That program worked okay. It was more of a community-based program when we started. And that was a lot of because we had involvement through Hilltop, and just the arrangement that we had and where it had to be housed, which was through Hilltop. It just made it very difficult. We stayed with that program for a couple of years until 2016, when we decided that it was time for an actual victim advocate that was hired and that was a part of our organizations, that was there and responsive to our needs. So in 2016, it was actually when Tammy, Under Sheriff Stroop, was our marshal here in Ridgway. She and I and Junior Mativi, the previous sheriff, got together. We talked about the program, and we decided a systems-based program that would service all three agencies was the best idea. And at that time, it was always thought that we really think that because this is a countywide program, it makes sense that this would be housed in the county, and that it would be administered through the county and out of that office. We didn't have that at that time, and so it landed in Ridgway. And I think some of you were here, and you probably remember when that started. I think it was Jen Coates that was the administrator at that time. And so we ended up and obtained the VEL grant funds at that time for an exclusive victim advocate that was working on a system-based level for us in law enforcement. And from that time, we kind of evolved, and we got more funding, more hours included with this service. And we've just learned that it's just expanded, and we have more need and greater needs. We do have a call system as well, and I'm sure our victims advocate can talk about that a little bit more, about how the call time works. But that was one of the key issues that we had, and what we've had in the past is, how do you handle that time when they're actually not working? How do you handle call time 24/7? Because we have to have a victim's advocate 24/7. And so it's been kind of an evolution, but we do have a victim's advocate right now, 20 hours per week, and then call time the remainder of the time. And so right now, that's kind of where we're at and how we've evolved to this point, and how we landed here in the town of Ridgway. Now, it was about a year ago, we had discussions about having this program moved back to the county, and that started in about October, November. And then after further discussions, it was decided because of the grant cycles, we would just keep things the way it was. We are now coming up on new grant cycles, which begin next year in 2023. And if we're going to make a transition, we think that this is probably the best time frame to make that transition. But I'll let Tammy speak a little bit more about victim services. She's actually been involved in victim services as a victims advocate. She was a victims advocate in Pueblo beginning in 2004. So she has a lot of great knowledge. She's been in this field for 20 years almost, working in the criminal justice field with a very strong concentration in victim services. So I'd like to just turn some time over to Tammy to just kind of talk about the program and what it's for, why we have it, the need. And then Shane, I know, wants to talk about some of the numbers that we have associated with this particular program, kind of what it will look like as we transition, if it's decided that it transitions. And then Elaine, certainly, if you have any comments or anything that you want to talk about, more than welcome to say anything. So.
Well, I told you that Justin likes to talk a lot, and he pretty much covered everything I was going to say. However, with that being said, a lot of times I don't think that there's a good understanding of what the difference is between community-based versus system-based. So community-based victim advocacy, there's a lot of confidentiality involved. So if somebody were to come and report, say, a domestic violence or maybe an assault, that has to remain confidential unless the victim wants to go ahead and report that to law enforcement. So where we were having trouble when we had the community-based, although it's a great program, I think that should still be in place, was working with our judicial system. So working with our DA, other law enforcement officials, as far as getting information that needed to be reported to them. So that's a lot of the reason why we came up with the system-based idea. And I think a lot of times we need to understand that victim advocacy is not just responding to, say, a sex assault or a domestic violence. A lot of times it's a death notification to somebody who's lost a family member that they're unaware of. So there's a lot more that goes into that system-based advocacy that helps law enforcement. And we have an obligation per statute to provide victim services to our communities as well. Can you think of anything else?
No, I think that's exactly what the program is. Are there any questions regarding the victim services program and what that entails, how that functions here in our county?
I would just throw out that as a member of the men's group and talking to the VASA women's group that's been trying to help more victims advocacy happen for sex assault victims in particular, and as well as domestic assault and all things like that. I think it's kind of amazing, but it really took us till about 2 or 3 months ago to really understand the limits of what I would call the LEVA, the law enforcement victims advocate, and to understand that Elaine in her position, anyone that was in that position, has a totally different set of responsibilities in terms of the kinds of things that they might hear from a victim and having to report that, potentially be a witness in a trial that could happen. And we really, in some way, I'm speaking for myself, I'll say I'm a little embarrassed that it took me this long to understand it, but I think we had a bunch of discussions with various law enforcement entities and just didn't get it, So I think it's great that we now understand that. And as Jake will tell you too, there's a whole separate effort right now to try and create a community-based victim advocate program in Ouray County, whether it's under Hilltop, whether it's something brand new. We obviously need community-based victim advocacy, and we need both, right? So I just want to say it's really been helpful for a lot of us to finally grasp the details of what the LEVA can do. And sorry to use the acronym, but it's just simpler. And get that we need to have that along with a community-based program.
I think that's great. I also, you just triggered me to remember something else. So I don't know if any of you are aware, but the Dolphin House, our child advocacy center in Montrose, we now have an agency assist MOU with them. So if we have any sex assault or, crimes in this side of the all messed up, Ridgway, Ouray, any of this district, I am now doing those forensic interviews for them at our office. So they donated all the equipment for us to be able to do that. But it also requires a victim advocate to be present for the family when we're doing those interviews. So for us to house the program in Ouray makes a lot of sense because we have somebody on hand to be there for those interviews.
Great.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, in the case that there is a rape kit that needs to go through the police department, is there a victims advocate available for the people who are going through that in that moment? Is that something that can?
Absolutely. That would be one of the first phone calls we would make, is to have a victim advocate respond.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as some of you know, the county is actually working on a sex assault response team. It's not going to be just a team that affects the county organization. It's going to be something that will be utilized for all of us. This is going to be, and I said this the other night in our forum, this is going to be a powerful investigative team, a multidisciplinary team that is made up of various functioning people and professionals throughout this county that will assist in these types of investigations, so we get the investigation done right the first time, so we don't have to go back. So when you brought up the sexual assault kit, so the SANE nurse or a SAFE nurse who is performing that will be performing that for the actual agency who has jurisdiction, but we will have an investigative team, and the victims advocate will be a specific part of that team to provide input and to provide resources. And we just feel that that's the best and most effective way to do this. A lot of brains make good things happen. My one brain and her one brain and everybody else's one brain alone is pretty limited. So we're really trying to make this as effective and wholesome as possible.
And the SARC, the sexual response team, has been discussed and has been in the works for a while.
It has, and in fact, we've attended meetings, we've been to trainings, and right now it's about a year-long process to get all the protocols in place before something like that can be initiated. But it is something that's going to happen. It's on one of our goals to happen by the end of next year, so it's going to happen very quickly.
I'd like to just provide some further clarification on the separation between the law enforcement victim. We're mixing terms a little bit here. So we've got the law enforcement victim advocate, and that's really the core of what we're talking about today.
Right.
is potentially transferring that program from the town to the county, expanding the program. But then there's also, whether you call it a sexual assault response team or a community-based team, that's a little less developed, and there are some folks who are discussing a non-law enforcement piece that would be more confidential and would be more about victim support. And that's some of what we were talking about a little earlier, is what John was talking about, is you hear the phrase victim advocate, but that has a very specific meaning here. That's the law enforcement victim advocate, and they have certain obligations under the law. And so there are two different possibilities out there, but here today, the focus is that law enforcement victim advocate. I'm sure we'll have more discussions in the future about that community-based program, but that is really in its very infancy right now.
And a whole separate deal. Yeah,
A whole separate.
try to.
I think we've had discussions in the past about, how we ended up hosting, the victim advocate program here in Ridgway, and we were certainly happy to do so, but have long thought it makes sense I have long thought it makes sense at the county level, provided that we know it's going to have the support that it's had in this community and in this jurisdiction. So I think, I find it a super important part of the puzzle, whether it goes with all those other pieces, but in some ways it does make sense to have the county be the overarching
Yeah, and
jurisdiction.
just for clarification, we're not we don't take ownership in this program.
Yeah.
This is a program that is functioning with all three agencies. Not me, nor Shane, nor Chief Wood are bosses per se individually over this individual, over the victim's advocate. We work together as a team that oversees the victim services program. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that if this is housed out of Ouray County, it's only for administrative purposes. I will tell you, on the scale of how many cases we respond to a very significant amount of cases in comparison to both Ridgway and the city of Ouray. So the city of Ouray responds to approximately I think they've responded to, or they've had 3 victim services cases this year. And the city of Ouray and Ridgway, I believe, is 8. And the county is in the 20s. And so just the amount and the volume that we deal with throughout the entire county in our geographical area, it actually makes sense that we do have more. It really makes sense that we have it housed there just based on the volume and the interviews that are taking place, if there is a place that's needed to do that, since it wouldn't occur in one of our offices.
And I think, you know, it could be wrong, but I think a lot of the reason it was housed in Ridgway versus we actually have an office and a
We
desk
did.
to put
And that was the deciding factor.
Right.
We wanted it at the county, but there was no availability of space. Now, that was prior to the reconstruction,
remodel.
but I'll tell you, there's still not a ton of space.
There's
And Connie's online and she can attest to that.
There's never
So can
enough
Jake
space.
and everybody else, but I think we're all limited in space.
Right.
But that's exactly right. That was the deciding factor, is there was office space in a place where Elaine, who was selected for the position at that time, could work out of. And so it worked.
I'll just throw out, I don't think you'll find any disagreement up here about moving it to your office. I don't know if anybody has any other questions about it, but it's the right thing to do at this point in time. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
And I think what we need is, since the program is currently housed with the town, is just direction from the council to your staff to work with the county staff to start that administrative changeover. So we just need the town to initiate that.
Awesome. I don't think there'll be any problem with that.
If we can, I'd like to just see if Shane would like to present some of the numbers and how the accounting and the grant processes work, because that is important for the county to understand, because there's some management involved with that, and some accounting that I know Pam has taken care of for quite some time. So I think it's important that the county, as they go through this transition, understands what this entails.
Right.
That it's not just a, hey, guys, we're here.
No, that's great. And Ben has arrived while we were talking. So
Oh, great.
Ben, you want to pull up a chair? Maybe you can take Tammy's seat there. Maybe. There you go.
So Tammy and Justin did a super job getting the program up and going and, you know, in process. And initially when it was started, we just had the Vail grant, which funded that. And the first year of the program in 2017, they funded the entire program for that year. So $40-some thousand was funded, and it funded the program. And we were like, that's great, you know, we can have this program and go forward with it. The next year, Vail had limited funds, and they said, well, we want more buy-in from the entities within the county that are using the services and that kind of stuff. So they cut substantially. We went from $42,000 down to $28,000 second year. And so we looked at it. There was a greater buy-in by the agencies within the county that used the program. And I think we were at $9,000 a year in order to keep the program operational that the entities within the county had to put in. So we started looking for grant sources other than that. And we found the VOCA grant, or the Victims of Crimes Act funding, which is a federal funding, and they have a substantial bigger coffer for the funds, but it's on a 2-year grant cycle. And so we weren't eligible to apply until 2019 for 20 and 21 was the funding years.
21.
Oh, yeah, sorry, 21 and 22 were funded with, when we did the 19 grant cycle. Or in 2020, sorry. So we got that funding, which substantially paid for a lot more of the program, and Vail that year cut us again down to 12,000 that year. So there was a substantial decrease in the amount, and that year the agencies within the county had to meet to fund the program. Then so we got the grant, and now Elaine worked super hard. And the one problem with the federal grant, it's great for the funds, but it requires an incredible amount. The application process is lengthy. You have to meet all these requirements. Then to keep the funds and to justify the funds, she spends most of her 20 hours a week is on the grant funding. Fortunately, we don't have the huge caseload or the victims, services, the requirement, but we also have to justify the amount of victim services versus the amount of administration on the VOCA grant. So we have to keep that balance going all the time. Wayne does a super job at meeting all those reporting requirements, and they constantly are sending fund or requests for more information and re-information. So this year she worked diligently and secured the grant for 23 and 24. So those funds are secured, and we were really lucky. There was a higher demand this year for the funds than in the past. And so we were lucky they only cut our grant by $1,200 from what we asked for this year, or for the 2 years. So that was good. Then we've lucked out with the CARES Act money and funding Vail. We asked for 18,000 the past 2 years, and they gave us that amount each year because they've had a little bit of excess funding. We don't know how that's going to transition as time goes along, because I'm sure there'll be more demand for those funds. But that's kind of where we are today. We do have the 23-24 secured, and Elaine is planning on retiring at the end of the year. And so we're going to have to go through a process of selecting a new victim advocate and to do the administrative and run. And the way the program works, we have 2 part-time victim advocates that are on call for 2 weeks each month, that when Elaine isn't available or is, has other things going on, has another life, wants time off, they step in and do that. So that's kind of where we're at with the program right now. We do have the funds secured good for next year. I think it's right at $1,000 this year is the agency funding requirement for the grants, which I think is pretty good for the amount of time and effort. But we're totally on board and working with the county to get it transitioned over if that's the decision that's made. And not that I mind doing any of it, but it'd be kind of a relief.
One last thing,
There's a lot of things that behind the scene things, and Elaine attends to a lot of those for me, but there's still something you have to do. So I'm in support of the county is wanting to take it over, willing to take it over. think it'd be great for the program.
Great. Thanks, Shane. And there's no issue with the funding and moving it?
The last time we talked to him last year when we were discussing it, we had mentioned it to him and they said, you know, we have to change signatures and project directors and that kind of stuff. But as far as they told us last year, there wasn't a huge issue with changing it. And that's kind of why we're thinking now with January would be a good time because that'll start the new grant cycle for the BOCA funds.
Great.
So it'd be, we think, probably the smoother transition time than trying to do it mid-grant.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things last year we decided to hold off until we saw what this year was going to bring.
Great. All right, thanks. Anybody on either side of the two tables have any more questions on this one?
Anything from the city?
Is the city represented?
City of Ouray?
Yes. You got anything to add? You got any questions or?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to add that the program is very beneficial to the whole county.
Absolutely.
It is so great to know that when we do have a victim, we're able to call somebody and they will respond quickly. Instead of having to wait a day or two, or they're waiting for a phone call or something like that, we have somebody in our area that can help the victim. Because these victims are hurt. And they need help immediately. So this program is very beneficial to the area.
Totally agree. We all agree with that.
I just have one more comment to make, and Shane kind of touched on this. I think the reality with grant funding is it's never secure. We never know for sure if we're going to get it from year to year. I just want to put a bug in everybody's ear that the reality is we need to have a kind of a future outlook of this program, that it may need to be self-sustaining one day between the three agencies. Not now, we're good for a couple of years, but in the event that we don't have the funding, we are statutorily required to provide victim services. So this is a program that we are going to have to continue one way or another. And so I know it's budget season. We're not talking about it today or for the next few years, but in the event that we start losing or that funding is being reduced, it will likely increase the amount of contributions from each agency. But it is the value for these survivors. They deserve it. They need to have it, and we want to provide it. So you guys, thanks a lot for your time. If you have any questions outside of today, you can always call me, Shane, or Chief Wood, or even Gary. Gary's been around long enough to know a lot about the program. So please let us know anytime.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. So
So I believe staff saw a lot of nodding heads. So I think we know the direction we need to go forward and getting the program transitioned to the county or attempting that here in the coming weeks, really, leading into 2023. So thank you again, everybody, for taking the time today. This has been great. Please indulge me. I would like everyone to give a round of applause for Elaine for her hard work over the years.
thanks, Preston. I was going to say the same thing. Thank you, Elaine. I know you've worked really hard for the county and for all our communities, and we really appreciate your efforts through these years and wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you, and I really enjoyed it. I have to tell you, got a great bunch of guys and gals that I've been able to work with. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Can I prevail on you to come back to my health class one more time before you leave?
Maybe.
We'll talk.
Even afterwards, I could probably.
Awesome. That'd be great. Thanks again. Well, I think that's it on that item, unless you got.
One last comment, just that we'll be working administratively to transfer over the nuts and bolts of funding. We also need to think about hiring and having potentially some overlap so that Elaine, you could help train a new person. And so that would be that would fall into the county's realm. And I just don't know how that's going to work out if we're not doing the formal transition till the start of 23. But then if we lose Elaine at the end of the year, we wouldn't have any crossover. So does anyone have any ideas?
But first, I have a question to you guys experienced in this world. How hard is it going to be to find somebody that's experienced and qualified for its job?
Well, I've been bringing along one of our contract advocates that is really ambitious and exciting. She has gone through the first set of training that I went through when I first started. She's getting ready to go to the advanced training. I got that okay through our grant manager, and I haven't had a chance to tell you. Instead of the COVID conference that I usually go to, I was able to transfer all of those funds to the Advanced Academy, which touches on mass casualty, which is awesome. She's extremely interested in it. She is definitely going to apply for the position, and
Is she one of the current on-call
yes,
people? Great.
yes, and has gone with me on cases, suicides. Matter of fact, she was the one that responded to the Jeep incident with the 3 fatalities there. She said, I learned a lot and had a great time learning it, watching the process, and I was really glad she was able to do that because I was out of town. So I have a lot of faith in her, and I think it's going to depend on these agencies on who they're comfortable with as well. But I know she will definitely put in for it.
Okay. And I don't know if you have anything to add, Tammy, but
I do, I think along with the advocacy piece, we need to be able to find somebody who's really good with the grant writing as well. So those two coupled together, finding the interest level there might be a task, but I'm certain there are many compassionate people out there who want to take on that endeavor, so.
okay. Well, and it occurs to me that just again, sort of thinking out loud here, while the program still resides in Ridgway out of town hall, we could start the process. We probably have to follow somewhat of a application process that's in our hiring process that's open. We can't obviously just hire somebody without interviewing, without opening the position up publicly. But we could start the process. We could include both the county and the city of Ouray in the interview process, and hopefully get it done before Elaine's done at the end of the year, or at least have it far enough along the process that there could be some overlap.
Well, there's one little stipulation there too. My grant reporting is going to go into January for the last quarter.
Okay.
And so I can't do that reporting until January. It's due like the 15th or something of January. And so if I need to put off until the end of January to retire to make sure all that grant stuff is out of the way, nobody else has to deal with it, mess with it, I'm willing to do that too, and train whatever I need.
Does staff actually need this level of direction, or can we have you work with Connie to figure out who it makes the most sense to post under and do that process?
Yeah, love that. That was what I was going to say. Thank you very much. Love to work with Connie. Iron out everything we're talking about, Jake. There's an IGA between the jurisdictions that gets approved each year that governs the program. And I think love to hear what Connie has to think if she'd like to chime in, but I think now would be a perfect time to start drafting the IGA for 2023 that will kind of lay out how some of this is going to work, perhaps even towards the end of the last month and a half of this year and into 2023. That makes sense.
Connie, do you have anything you want to add?
Can you hear me all right? Because I had technical difficulties on my county computer and I had to use my home computer. So
We can hear you.
okay, thank you. Sorry about that. But I agree with Preston. I mean, I think we should start the advertising for the job as soon as we can. So if you have like an example of an advertisement, maybe we could advertise it through the county, since it'll eventually be a county employee, or we can do it together, whatever you would like, so that we can maybe get somebody on board before Elaine's gone to start. I'm being optimistic. It takes a long time to hire people, I know, but hopefully we'll get someone on board before she goes in January if possible. It's a little hard, I think, with the holidays coming up too, but an IGA would be good. We have the current one, it's just modifying it and then changing our budgets, right? To address the revenue and expenses. So we'll have to figure that out. And then I have a question. I'm sorry I missed the first part. I'm sure you addressed it. The person is going to reside as far as an office at the town. Is that correct?
No, it's going to move to the county sheriff's.
To the county. Okay, so that's another challenge that we'll have to figure out with Justin and Tammy, which I'm sure I see him coming up, so.
Yeah, so I can address that right now. So we actually have 3 separate workstations, and one of those we have already dedicated to this position. So we do have a location where our victims advocate will be able to work. We have a private interview room where she'll or he'll be able to do their daily business. So
Very good. Thank
We're
you.
good.
Sorry if you had to repeat, I apologize.
That's no problem. And so basically, I think Beth's suggestion that you and Preston get together and start trying to work out the nuts and bolts of the transition and the notice of an opening for the new person, and let you guys figure the details out for that. And then we'll plan on getting together in early January to get the IGA signed and get it moving on. I do want to ask if there's anybody online or in the room that has any questions about the discussion we've been having, wants to weigh in at all. Just, it's a public meeting. Don't see any hands up online. Anybody in the room? I think that's a good thing. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thanks again, Elaine. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Tammy. All right, so that takes us to discussion of the preserve PUD, and that you guys are aware from discussions with the developer about the portions of that project that lie in the county as of now. And there'd been talk of there being easements to deal with that, but things have changed a little with the need for the developer to move their lift station onto part of the property that actually lies in the county. And so at a council meeting recently, we discussed this, and while there was some pretty serious initial resistance, uncomfortableness with an annexation process, we decided that that might make the most sense, but that it would obviously require a discussion with you guys to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're not stepping on anybody's toes. So Preston, does that
Well
kind of
done. Yeah,
wrap up the situation?
I think that's a good summary.
Do you guys have any questions about the way I?
No, I'm just curious why the road wasn't annexed when the property was annexed in 2006, but
It's a good question.
it's history.
It was, we thought it was just a road and it wasn't gonna be a problem. Now
Yeah.
we learned.
But it, for the purposes of the development, it seems like that would make sense if the city or the town infrastructure is going to be placed in the county right away. This time, that would, an annexation of the road and then governed by the terms of the town code would
Right.
make the most sense.
Okay.
To me.
Yes, and during our work session with the developer, I recall primary question I had, and I think that it was a theme on the board, was why doesn't the town want to annex? And fortunately, we did put the developer in this situation where we both pointed at each other and said,
Happens all the time.
and so glad we're having this conversation all together now, but I don't think you'd be stepping on the county's toes, and just from looking at the details, that's the simplest, most elegant solution, instead of making the developer go through dual processes with both the town and the county with easements. It turns into a headache, and it just makes sense to annex that little bit.
Okay. The only question I would have, and I'll let everybody else weigh in too, is this going to impact our IGA, our development IGA?
I think that mostly covers like parcels and not roads.
Yeah, so that was my take too, but I thought it needs to be said that that's a potential red flag.
In this case, my understanding of the Municipal Annexation Act is that generally when development property is annexed, that the associated road goes with it too. But there are many cases, mostly from the Front Range, of when Thornton annexed half of the road and neighboring city wound up with the county wound up with half of it. The road was half maintained and one together and half not, resulting in a confusion. In this case, it seems like if the development properties are within the boundary of the municipality, the road should probably be as well.
Road and the infrastructure. Okay.
I think it'd be good to have the applicant come up to talk a little bit, because there's a couple elements here, of course, the road, and then recall the lift, and the location of the lift station was the other deal, right? So, Chris, do you want to talk?
Sure, I can sense the desire for brevity tonight. So
Always.
if you wouldn't mind pulling up that presentation I emailed you. And then there's just one map. I'm not gonna go through the full presentation because I can just tell where you're at. But yeah, the lift station as designed didn't work. And so there was this conversation about trying to extend it out into the Dalwhinnie property and have it out there. But if the council's amenable to considering a formal annexation, that almost becomes a moot point, because then that's within the town boundaries and that would be considered a part of the overall annexation process. When the map comes up, I'll just show the element. I did look at this from the Colorado municipal annexation requirements. I didn't see any in the municipal code, so I just looked at that, and it seems to meet all the requirements for contiguity and area of interest and et cetera. There's several findings you have to make overall. Sorry, if you want to scroll down to the maps. So everyone knows where this is at. If you could keep going. The next map. So this is roughly the area. And actually keep going to the very back. So if there's a map, you'll see it shows roughly the annexation.
Chris,
You put that on Zoom too?
This is.
I'm not going to be able to project on Zoom, Terry. I don't have the email on this computer.
Okay, thanks.
So this is the area of the lift station where it would need to be located now, but it would be within the annexation area. And the next map just shows detail of it in the next slide. And you can just see it's got all the requirements, lift station, control, standby generators, all the things you see in the lift station. So that's more of the detail of it. If you keep going way towards the end, there's a aerial photo. Sorry, I wasn't sure how formal this was going to be. I just want to be.
That's fine.
So, okay.
Hey, Chris.
So this,
Let me stop for, if you
So-
enable my sharing, I'll use my phone to show what he's doing.
Jake could do it, because I think it's the same.
No, it's a little different.
Yeah.
So while we're trying to get this all worked out, I do have a question. I know
Sure.
there was some gray area at our last conversation, not at the last council meeting, but at the one before, where Joanne, the town engineer, was saying that she wasn't sure about all of the specs on the lift stations, and none of those had been approved in the past, and I just kind of want to know what. the
She will still
development is
have
on
to
that.
formally review and approve all the specs for a lift station, but it'll be Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment requirements, #1, and then town standards 2. So this will be, if it's annexed, this will be a dedicated parcel to the town for the lift station that's split off, that the town owns and manages with an easement for the road to get to it. So, but yeah, it'll still have to meet all the specs for sure. So real quick, I'll start explaining this. So I just drew this up today to say what would happen if we were in favor of annexation. So, and Michael took a look at this too. So this is about 3.77 acres that involves the Dalwhinnie property, which is like 21 acres total to the south. Plus, it also includes the right of way that has not been annexed to the town yet. So this would be adding about 3.77 acres to the town. If you're interested in it too, this small strip here was never annexed to the town, but it's owned by the town. And if you want to, it makes sense if you want to include that in the any annexation. Because that was just a small sliver that's left over. This was all dedicated as part of the subdivision, the park. But this small little sliver, even though it's owned by the town, is still in the unincorporated county. So we could do that if you want, but that's not the main thing. So at least for the annexation option, this is what you'd be looking at it. We would prepare the annexation petition. the annexation map that's required, work with your town attorney on the petition before we submit to make sure all the parties are happy with it. Especially if you want this included in the annexation. I don't want to complicate this, but we can maybe clean up house if possible.
No, that's great.
Okay, anybody have any questions? Seems like a pretty much a no-brainer, especially if the county's okay with it. I had noticed that little triangle when we were last reviewing this in front of council, and I was totally surprised to see that that's
It's just a weird
just
carryover from the
outlaw.
sub days.
And I honestly wondered about the road right away as well. So I think this is really a great way to get some things cleaned up. And again, if you guys in the county don't have a problem with the annexation concept and don't feel like it goes against our joint IGA on land use proposals development, and I think it's kind of a no-brainer. Anybody have any questions?
Just a few cleanup things too, Your Honor,
Go
when
ahead.
appropriate.
You
So,
don't have to come in, you're on.
okay. Okay. So, when you annex land, you typically assign zoning to it. That's typical. So that's just part of the process. If we can say annexations aren't part of the moratorium and we're just doing an annexation that has the zoning in it, that's just one thing we need to make sure that we're not going to get in that trap. I know you probably want to talk about that, but that's just something I thought of today.
You're right, we want to talk
Totally fair
about it,
point.
but we need to consult with Bo, but a case can certainly be made, provided that this is an active application. And the moratorium wasn't intended to affect.
Okay.
Wasn't intended to affect active applications.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I just also want to make sure that we're not going to need to amend the UGMA, that growth agreement, that UGMA line.
And he's saying that urban growth,
Management area.
Yeah, the urban growth boundary, I'll show you where that line's at, want to go to the next slide, please. So here's the top map is this is the UGMA map. And here's, if you go up here, this is it on an aerial photo. It's on the south side of Solar Ranches. That's why I picked up my lot, because that boundary was right there. But, so this annexation is outside. And I think everyone's aware of that. There was a little bit of a conversation about that. You know, if we need to amend that concurrently, great. If we don't, great. I just wanted to be clear in terms of what you'd like to see.
That line is memorialized in the master. And we'll consult with Bo, but it's not a major undertaking to modify that line in the master plan.
that's what I was getting at with the IGA of the county too. I think it's memorialized there as well.
Yeah, we're willing to do some of the lifting on this for drafting or whatever, because we understand you guys are really busy at the county and at the town. So however we can help out with that if this is the direction. So thank you. I just have those few questions. That's all.
Thank you. Anybody online have questions before I turn my camera off about any of this?
Thanks, John.
I'll just over here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it would be, I mean, we did after the town's master plan was updated recently.
2019.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years ago. We did then correspondingly adjust and, you know, in our land use code and our agreements, the reflection of any changes in the boundaries, right? It would be, the timing might be difficult to make any of those adjustments now, but I'd wait and consult with Bo and on your part, and we can talk with county attorney on our part to see what would need to be done.
Yeah.
But considering that this was annexed into the town well before that 2019 process, maybe that should have been reflected in the master plan update at the time and the corresponding county adjustments at the time.
Sure.
It might have been an oversight.
Sorry, and just any clarification, no need to answer it now. I'm assuming it's an amendment to the preliminary plat would need to submit a formal application, hopefully concurrent with the annexation process or shortly after. But the timing of that would be if we could do them all kind of together, or if Bo wants us to do the annexation first and then that. But ideally, we could do it all concurrently together. that would be great. So
Well, it makes sense from an efficiency standpoint, but again, got to consult with Bo.
I understand. Yeah.
To understand how all of that meshes with the spirit of that moratorium ordinance, if that makes sense. But again, I think a case can certainly be made. I am not an attorney, so.
Not even.
Speaking of attorneys, Leo, or Mark Castrodale, obviously we have on, any concerns or information we should have from you about that process and potentially updating UGMA?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak briefly if you guys can hear me okay.
We got you. Can hear you.
I'm looking at the UGMA and the IGA, and I'll talk to Bo about this, but we might be okay. I'm not sure if amendments to the UGMA are triggered by something that's part in the UGMA and part in the AOI. I think if we were fully in the area of influence, we might have to trigger an amendment process, but I do want to discuss that with Bo, just to see what the easiest way to do this is. Just given the fact that the UGMA and the area of influence do also live in our land use code. We could amend our land use code too after this if we need to, but there might be an easier way to do this and simplify it for everyone.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you got to get the attorneys for both entities together to figure out some of the gory details. But glad to hear that there's general support. Mark, do you have anything you want to add?
Not really. I like the direction we're headed. And as Leo said, just some confirmation of whether or not we have to amend the UGMA and or the land use code. And that's not the end of the world if we do, but certainly no concerns on my end.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, staff has direction to get with the attorneys for both parties and figure out what needs to happen, and then the assistance of the developer, it sounds like, get a annexation process going and the documents together, and we'll see that at council sometime in the next couple of months.
Good with the commissioners.
Good with me.
It's about probably 4 to 6 weeks to get an annexation plat together. But it would be nice to hear, would the council like to see that small triangle parcel annexed concurrently with this? And we
I
can
don't see the reason why not.
go to town.
Do you have any concern with that?
Doesn't.
No, that makes sense. I'm looking at the ownership on Google Earth, and yeah, the town owns that, and it's strange that it's is not in the town.
It is.
And it's right next. So
Who knows how that happened, but let's get it fixed.
who knows? Yeah,
Okay.
I'm fine with fixing that.
I'll get the survey work started.
You okay with that, Ben?
Yeah.
Great. All right,
I don't.
it's great when we all get along.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We don't have it agendized. I don't know if we're allowed to talk about it.
What do you got?
But the detention pond on the Wetterhorn project, that is another situation where we've got requests from both the town and county. So I don't know if we are allowed to talk about that since it's not agendized.
I would recommend that we not, given that that we did not notice that would be discussed in the forum. I don't know about the county. But
Yeah,
That's probably the right.
Yeah, we won't, I was gonna not bring it up in a formal setting, but we can,
It's hanging out there and needs to get
yeah.
addressed. So.
We might have to discuss it when we do our IGA discussion at some point.
That's right. Which right now, I don't know if Connie's still on, but pretty soon, maybe perhaps next.
Connie is still on.
And we're all having dinner tomorrow night.
And we're.
Go ahead, Connie.
Yeah, I still have to get the MOU scheduled. I got Preston's changes back. I need to make a few changes for the county, and I need to have our attorney just review it since he's really not seen it before. And then I hadn't even gotten input from our commissioners. It's pretty routine. I've included the updated budget numbers, but I just want to make sure there's not something else we don't want to, put in. And I also haven't heard back from the city yet, so I need to get back with Silas on theirs. We're a little behind this year. Seems like there's a lot of activity occurring, so I'll get on that and get something set up with Preston.
Great, thanks.
And when we do have that discussion, we also got just a heads up of kind of shift in funding strategies for the long-term durability of mountain rescue team, search and rescue. That we have dealt with already this week, but I think they will be coming to both the town and the city for the same request, which made sense to us. So.
They have submitted, I think, and they submitted a letter with the funding request, so that'll be reviewed.
Okay. Anybody, there's no audience left here in the room. Anybody on Zoom have any last minute questions or comments about this item? Okay. Looks like we're good.
Thanks.
Thanks. Productive meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Night, everybody.
Night.
On Zoom.